there are so many ways to optimize your sword gameplay. And yeah, that's great if you know how to do some crazy read like this one, but sword isn't really about knowing crazy combos or crazy extensions, right? It's more so about improving your fundamentals. A few people have asked me to make a neutral game guide, but I'm not going to do that because Stingray has already made the best neutral game guide. It's linked in the description, so if you want to know more about that, please go check that out after this video. Sword is a really flexible weapon, so for opponents who like to stay grounded, a lot of times you're going to be looking for side lights, end lights, and dlight punishes like this. But for opponents who are more floaty, a lot of times when you approach them, you're going to be looking for jump dares, even nairs, and especially jump sares. But no matter who you're facing, or what legend or weapon they're playing, your strategy with sword is pretty much always the same. Use your movement to approach your opponent, bait out an option, punish that option, and build up enough chip damage to kill your opponent 3 times. The most important tip for this video is to not throw yourself at your opponent unless you already have a hard read at them. For starters, I see a lot of less experienced sword players try to throw themselves at their opponent with a sword sidelight. Yes, this move gives you a lot of momentum, but it's really only good if you can do the sidelight when you're starting from very close to them. See how unreactable it is if I sidelight from here? However, if I sidelight from far away, anybody can just step out of the way, avoid this, and punish me back for it. Even better than a sidelight, you can walk up to your opponent and end light on reaction, because this move is so fast. The benefit of approaching someone is that they always have some sort of reaction. For example, I dash up to this Bodvar, he can either do nothing, he can spot dodge, he can jump, he can try to hit me, but at the end of the day, these are all things that I can read that would not have happened if I was just sitting at the edge of the map. The moral of the story is that if you approach your opponent, you can bait them to do something disadvantageous and go in for a punish. You can also do something like approaching your opponent, short hopping around them, waiting for a reaction, and then falling on top of them with a dare, or even a nair if you read them jumping. And to build on this point, when you're reading dodges, you don't need to go for some crazy high-risk, high-reward commitment like that one, like using a GC just to punish a dodge, to still get a lot of value. All I have to do is dlight dare and simply just react to his dodge. Let's try it one more time, dlight dare, fall down with a sair that time. Same thing applies to your other moves like sidelight. Like I can do sidelight, react to then end light. Let's try it one more time, sidelight, react to then end light. I can even do something like a sidelight jump, and now that I'm in the air, I can react to an aerial like that. But if we start taking way too long to react to our opponent's dodge after we hit a move, we run into one of 2 problems. Either your opponent just stops dodging altogether, or they start waking up. But the beauty of sword sidelight is that it has no variable force, so whether they stop dodging or they start waking up, you just start doing sidelight into end light to just hit them outright. The same problem exists for sword end light. Let's say I hit an end light and I dash up to my opponent and they wake me up. Either that or I dash up to my opponent and they literally do nothing. In white to yellow damages, you can just try to hit them, go end light into sidelight. Or the other option you can do, especially once they start getting into yellow or orange damages, when the end light starts sending too far away to hit a follow-up. I end up saying this in every video, but it's a perfectly valid strategy to just hit someone and do nothing afterwards, because only sometimes your opponent is going to do something out of hit stun that allows them to be punished. Like for example, I hit them, I do nothing, I wait for them to miss the wake up, and I punish it. But a lot of times when you hit someone, they don't do anything that you can actually punish. So in this situation, it's perfectly fine to just hit them, take your 15 damage, and reset back to neutral, and try to do it all over again. However, if you just want to start reading your opponent, you can do sidelight into dare. As we see here, we can do sidelight into dare into recovery. And if you manage to catch a dodge off this dare, you can do something like a GC dlight follow-up afterwards. There are so many ways to optimize this weapon, but again, you don't need to know them to actually be able to win with sword. Just going for something like a dare into a recovery is perfectly valid. Some other options for catching jumps are sidelight into sair. That's great for sending your opponent off stage. You can also do something like a sidelight nair, and at white to yellow, of course, that will lead into recovery. But I feel like if you're doing sidelight nair, you might as well do dare, because like I said before, there is more potential for follow-ups after a dare because it can lead into a GC dlight. If you want to KO your opponent, you can go for sidelight into recovery. That's a great option, especially because let's say you miss and you do the recovery and your opponent doesn't jump. This is pretty difficult to punish because remember, you literally just hit them. They're coming right out of hit stun, so they're probably not going to be immediately ready to punish this recovery. Now that's for if your opponent likes to jump, but if they don't, you can do sidelight end light for 2 frames like I said before, If they don't have a dodge and you don't think they're going to jump, you can do side light into dlight. That's even better than the end light, of course. In my personal experience, when I send my opponent off stage with the side light, that's usually when I like to go for dlight, because a lot of people will like to hide behind the cover of the wall here, so they might fast fall, and of course the dlight hits so low that it'll catch that. Another option I like to go for when I send my opponent off stage with side light is side light into ground pound. Like I said before, a lot of people like to hide behind the cover of the wall, so they might dodge down, they might fast fall to get behind the wall. So side light ground pound will catch this, and of course, you can read panic jumps afterwards with a dare. On a lot of the sword legends, I also just like to go for side light into sig. I mean, that literally just killed at 100. By the way, in the current patch, side light into side sig is actually confirmed on Giro if they have no dodge. You can do side light into sig on literally every sword legend, but I think the best one to do it with is actually Thatch. As you see, his sigs are literally just so huge. You can do side light into side light into end sig. And there are a lot of other great sig confirms on the other sword legends. For example, on Brawlhalla, you can do dlight into chase dodge down diagonal, end sig for 1 frame. Hattori dlight end sig is absolutely ridiculous. That just completely spikes them all the way down to the bottom of the map. Such a high value punish. On Koji, if you hit a dlight really close, or you dash into the dlight, you can get dlight end sig true all the way into kill percent. Now, this is a lot of confirmed damage, but I wouldn't get too excited because a lot of times it is kind of situational because you do need to hit the dlight really close. And most of the time, you do just want to be hitting your normal sword combos anyway because they lead into better positions. And the dlight GC NC doesn't even really kill that early anyway, so most of the time if you want to do this, it's just for the raw damage numbers. Something that surprisingly not a lot of people know is that dlight jump recovery, like that, kills slightly earlier than regular dlight recovery. I think I can technically get a KO here with a regular recovery if I just line the recovery perfectly, but I'm sure you guys can see if I add the jump, it becomes a lot more consistent because I'm bringing my opponent closer to the blast zone with that extra height I got. Some other ways to optimize your dlights are if you're around like 120, 130, you can do dlight dare GC end light that's unjumpable. And of course, if they have no dodge, you can totally go for something like another dlight follow-up right there. Like that just straight up killed him. But I'm sure you can tell, like since the dlight is a lot smaller of a hitbox, this is a little bit more ambitious. A lot of times just going for dlight dare into GC end light is what I like to do. But if I'm being completely honest, even if I do catch a dodge off that dlight, a lot of times I just go for dlight dare into recovery just because it's so safe, it's so consistent, and it sets them up in the air afterwards, which is a very advantageous juggle situation for me. But the one time I would 100% recommend you start going for these optimizations is on platform maps. As you see there, dlight dare end light off the platform is completely true. And as we see here, the platform actually makes the dlight follow-up unjumpable. So if your opponent likes to burn their dodge a lot in neutral, or you get a good read on them, this is an extremely important conversion to know that can win you games super efficiently. To be honest, the only other optimization I really like to go for on a game-to-game basis is dlight into ground pound. That is also unjumpable, but it's kind of a hard input unless you either hit the dlight really close or you dash into it like this. The main time I like to use this is when your opponent is kind of like riding their head up the wall and you nick the top of their hitbox with your dlight right here. It's kind of hard to simulate this in the training room, but I'll simulate it with a GC, right? So if I hit a really high dlight like that, that is a much more consistent and easy input. The last thing I want to mention here is that GC dlight is such a strong punish option on sword because it hits so low, it's so far away, and still leads into all your true combos. GC dlight is especially strong against weapons like hammer or blasters that don't have grounded attacks that can cover the air. As we see here, I can kind of just like jump over the attack in GC dlight. GC dlight is a great counter for moves like blasters dlight or bow dlight, especially bow dlight. But it's especially weak against weapons like scythe, gauntlets, and katars for obvious reasons, right? As with any GC punish, if you miss a dodge like this, an aerial dodge in neutral, this is like 80 free damage for the string weapon user. And one more application for a GC dlight that I see a lot in pro level gameplay is reading cross-ups. For example, if I approach my opponent, a lot of times they might move past you. And this is especially common in modern Brawlhalla, that we have access to this really fast dash snapping mechanic that allows people to kind of spaz all over you. In situations like this, you can go for a very hard read, dash past them, and do a GC dlight in the opposite direction. As we see here, this GC dlight covers this whole area, so if someone is dash snapping all around you, this is a decent counter, but remember, it's a hard read. So it's in your own best interest to only do this when you're absolutely sure that your opponent will get caught by this. My advice of not overcommitting or throwing yourself at your opponent like this when you're on the stage also applies to when you're juggling someone. As we all know, Nair and recovery are some of the strongest juggling tools in the game just because they're super straightforward in how they hit and they have good hitboxes and they come out quick. But the one thing to note here is that recovery, while it does the most damage and has the most force for knocking out, it is also the most punishable. My advice here is if your opponent has a dodge, a lot of times it's not a good idea to just full commit with a recovery because you will get punished. For example, if I send my opponent in the air with a Nair and I full commit early with this recovery, this is an extremely easy punish for the Bodvar. However, if I set the bot to random dodge and I manage to send him in the air, I can just react to him and then that's a good time to recovery. In juggle situations when my opponent is saving their dodge, a lot of times I just like to go for Nair as a default option just because it's so quick. If they start drifting to the side, you can do a Sair. And if they start fast falling below me, you probably guessed it, I can go for a Dare. Sending your opponent off stage with sword is advantageous for this weapon, but not for the same reasons that it is for string weapons like scythe, gauntlets, or katars. When you send your opponent off stage with sword, it's less about chasing them off stage and trying to get some crazy gimp, like the other weapons, but more so about the control you have over the situation and your opponent. For example, sword is just such a well-rounded weapon. I have literally every tool I need to stuff out all of my opponent's options. As we saw there, once I send my opponent off stage, I can do a Sair to read jumps. If they start recovering in this middle area like that, that's a free dlight Sair to send them back off stage. If I send them downwards, I can read jumps with Dare like that. I mean, there's so many other options. You can do something a little bit more unconventional, like another GC dlight like that. If I send my opponent deep off stage and they have like no options left, a lot of times going for GC Enlight is also not a bad idea. As you see, Enlight is like an instant wall, and if they don't have a dodge, this is very hard to avoid. And of course, you don't even need to chase your opponent off stage to get a lot of value with this weapon, because as we see, moves like dlight, which hit super low and lead into all your true combos, in combination with Enlight, which is just an immediate wall of hitbox that comes out, this allows you to get so much value on the ledge. One thing to note here is, if you saw the way I hit that dlight, if you hit the dlight really high up, like you just nick the top of their hitbox, you don't actually need to jump before you input Sair. And let's say I miss my dlight like this, I can cover myself with an Enlight. I know this just got nerfed in the recent patch. Their sword has a lot more recovery frames nowadays on miss, but this is still an option. A lot of people still don't know the exact timing of how to punish sword dlight. So if you miss this dlight, not a bad idea to go for an Enlight right after, to take advantage of people who don't know the frame data. And just a quick recap of all the value you can get by just standing on the ledge and not actually going off stage is, if your opponent rides their head off the wall, this is a free dlight. If they try to punish the missed dlight, you can take advantage of this and maybe go for an Enlight wake up, although that's slightly nerfed. If they try to recover like this and they dodge through you, a lot of people like to save their dodge to try and get past you. This is a free Enlight because it has enough active frames to get through the dodge. If they try to recover from the wall and go high, like this, you can read their jump with a jump Sair, or literally any other aerial. Jump Nair, jump recovery. If they go up and they try to like dodge through you like this, you can even look for a jump Dare. The point being is that this weapon is just so versatile, and while I can't give you every single solution to every single problem, once you guys get comfortable knowing where the moves hit, which I don't think is very hard, it's pretty easy to come up with solutions for all these different recovery options. And before I say this, I want everyone to understand that I'm not saying that sword sidelight is a bad move. In fact, it's actually the exact opposite. This move is so strong because it has a good hitbox, has good coverage, it comes out super fast, has follow potential, but it does have one problem. Let's say, for example, I miss my sidelight. My opponent dodges it, they jump over it, whatever. Before, I had the whole stage behind me and all the stage control to work with, but I've completely thrown that away for this sidelight, and now my opponent is in advantage state because they can edgeguard me now. Again, I'm not saying to never go for sidelight. I mean, hell, you can even go for a GC sidelight to cover aerial options. This move is really good for approaching. The one thing I do want to say, though, is just be careful, because if your opponent is constantly avoiding your sidelight and you're constantly throwing yourself off the stage, maybe you want to pick a different option. If your opponent is jumping like this, maybe you can just go for a jump Sair. If your opponent is not jumping, maybe try to go in for an Enlight. This move is super strong because, well, I mean, it just comes out instantly. And again, if I miss this move, I'm not completely throwing myself off the stage. Alright guys, that's the end of the video. Thank you so much for watching, and if you want to keep improving at sword, I would highly recommend you just focus on your fundamentals of the game, like movement, approaching, baiting and punishing, etc. Because although there are so many ways to optimize this weapon, at the end of the day, it really just is fundamentals, neutral game, and chip damage. So if you want to know more about neutral game, I would highly go recommend you check out Stingray's neutral game guide, which is linked in the description below. Anyway, I hope to see you guys next time. Bye-bye.